Hello and welcome to the Sunday Superversive Livestream. Today, I will be your host, Anthony Marchetta. Ben cannot make it today. I gather he has prior commitments. Now, you might have noticed that there is, in fact, an event happening today. I believe it's sports related. I'm kidding, I'm not going to gamma this. The Super Bowl's on, but we're doing the live stream anyway. We are here, or in this case, I am here with our guest, Caroline Furlong. She has appeared with us multiple times in the past and is a regular in the Superversive discussions. She has multiple published works with Sursova, Story Hack, and various other places. Is working on multiple novels, and has her own blog that is currently gaining in popularity, carolinefurlong.wordpress.com. We have her bibliography linked in our description. So, for those of you who want some background noise while the Super Bowl is running, or just aren't that interested in sports, and why would you be? As the NFL has stated themselves that football is in fact gay. So, going by their own words, if you are not gay, then you might just not be interested in this game. In which case, welcome. We will be discussing today the anime 86 and particularly the light novels and the anime 86. Now, I have read volume 1 of the light novels as the first 4 novels, and it brings us up to the end of season 1 of the anime, though it does flash forward a bit, and we will talk about that. And I'll shut up for a moment. Caroline, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I will say right now, if you want to avoid spoilers for the anime, shh.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just for the record, we are not going to avoid spoiling.
No, definitely not.
It's just like it would be a boring discussion if we did. It would be a very, at the very least, it would be a very different discussion, and I would prefer to do yeah. I would prefer to do a deep dive into it. I think that that's more interesting and more fun anyway. At least for this particular format.
Agreed.
So, 86. Now, first off, I'll let you're probably a larger fan than me, though admittedly I am getting there. You've certainly read more of the light novels than I have so far, though I will absolutely continue reading them. Because I really, really enjoyed this volume 1. Merg Magel Remaxis says, what book should I start with if I finish the 2 anime seasons? Ooh, that's a good question. You better answer that instead of me.
I'm gonna have to double check the title because I think it's hard. It's easy to lose. Shoot. Light novel. There we go. It's easy to lose the track of the titles. I think the is just called 86, and that's definitely the one you should start with because it goes into more depth than the anime has time to get into. The anime is very, very good. I started out with the anime based on the trailer, which I saw in a different Discord, and it was so interesting. I just had to go and watch it because it was an interesting premise. A war with no casualties, and yet there are mecha fighting. And at the same time, the heroine, Lena, everyone says, well, why do you care so much about these drones? She says they're not drones. Then turns out they're people. Lena,
yeah,
citizen of. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish what you're
No,
saying first.
Lena is a citizen of the Republic of a war with the Mechanical Legion. These are autonomous mechanized drones that were developed by the Giadan Empire 9 years ago and sent to attack the Republic. The Legion have a lifespan, and they appear to be nearing the end of that lifespan. at the start of the series when Lena has graduated from the military academy, achieved the rank of major, and become a handler, someone who commands the juggernauts, the supposed drones of the Republic's army. The Republic is primarily made up, the citizenry is primarily, pardon me, made up of the Alba. This is a broad, um, with various shades of white, silver hair, and silver eyes, and white skin. It turns out they were not originally the only inhabitants of the Republic of San Magnolia. They had allowed several other races, the Colorata, as the Alba called them, to move in and become citizens until 9 years ago when the racism that the Alba had for the Colorata was allowed. I'm trying to think of the word. An outlet with the attack by the Empire. They passed a law stripping the Colorado outside of what territory the Republic had managed to maintain when the Legion first swept in. Have the Colorado, which they came to refer to as the 86 because they live in the 86th district outside the 85 within the walls that they built to keep the Legion out, along with the Colorado, to fight their war for them. By the point that the story starts, all the able adults among the 86 have been killed on the battlefield. Anyone too old or too young is still in the camps. Anyone who was not conscripted to fight was conscripted to build the Grand Mirror, the wall that surrounds what's left of the Republic of San Magnolia. And so now the only army that the Republic is fielding is teenagers from the 86, piloting substandard mecha known as juggernauts. The 86 are stripped of their names, so they're only referred to as processors, not pilots, for the juggernauts. They only have a number. However, if they manage to survive their first year on the battlefield, they get to pick their own name, or code name, call sign, and become known as name bearers. Lena is given command of Spearhead Squadron in the Eastern Theater, and Spearhead Squadron is an elite squad. All the members are name bearers. They have all served in the Eastern Theater for almost 5 years. They're about to reach their 5th. And I think I'm going to pause there and take over for a minute.
I think that's a good spot to stop in terms of a summary of, kind of the premise of the book. So, end of the series, I should say. So, yeah, 86, there's so much to talk about. It's difficult to say where to start. So, I guess I'll start with saying that, like you, I watched the anime first. On your recommendation, though, I had watched the first episode, but you were really, really into 86, and you were trying to convince the Superversives to watch it. Since I'd seen the first episode, I decided to finish watching it, and I really enjoyed it. And I want to have you on to talk about it one day. But we had a mecha discussion, and we discussed 86 there. So I said, just to justify having something a little bit extra to talk about, I'll take a look at the light novel. So I've only read volume 1. There are multiple volumes out, but the one that I've read is volume 1 of the light novel series, and that's the first 4 books, I believe. And
it's only the first book.
Is it real? I thought the volume
all the events in season 1. Mine sans the last 2 episodes, which actually lead up to books 2 and 3.
Oh, see, I thought that volume 1 was like I said some. Let me look at the cover again because maybe I misread something. I thought it was like books 1 through 4 are in volume 1, if that makes sense. But either way, I read it. Basically, it leads up to the first scene, right? That's what I've read.
Hmm.
So the
Yeah, it covers
first,
the first season.
yeah, and actually, the epilogue goes like well past that. In fact, technically the epilogue goes up to the 2 epilogues go up to past even where season 2 is currently.
Yeah, the season 2 should end in that place, but I'm not sure exactly how many episodes season 2 is supposed to have.
So yeah, as I'm looking at thank you, you're right. The cover of 86. It does say 1 through 4 on the cover, but it is in Japanese. So oh, mechanical design. That's what I was reading. Okay. Yeah, that makes now I get it. It says mechanic. It shows mechanical designs 1 through 4. There you
Ah,
go. All right. So
good.
yeah. Either way, though, it brings us up to the end of the first. That's the important
Mhm,
thing. So here's what I'll say about my thoughts on the show generally. So I really, really enjoyed it. As far as the anime adaptation goes versus the book, it was interesting because with light novels have a reputation of not being very well written, and I think it's deserved. To be fair, uh, and yeah, the Merg Maggle Remaxa says the last 2 episodes are out by are going to be out by March. Yep, they will be. Anyway, I think light novels do have something of a deserved reputation for not being very well written. I mean, Sword Art Online is notorious, but even relatively good quote unquote light novels that turn into good shows
mhm,
have something of a reputation of not being well written. For example, Log Horizon is a great example of an absolutely brilliant anime that was in both Ben and my S tier of anime. It's
mhm.
at least a borderline masterpiece. It's a fantastic show. And the light novel is just written in a very pedestrian way. Uh, I think that the anime is just genuinely straight up an improvement. Like, I don't even think it's a question. 86 is different, but 86 is different in a really interesting way. It's different in an interesting way in that the light novels are actually excellent. Uh, they're excellently written. They and there is I would recommend reading the light novels even if you've watched the anime, but that's not to say that the anime actually is notably worse. This is an interesting, version of an adaptation because it's not so much that the anime is worse than the light novels, and if you want the full story, you should watch the light novels, or that if you watch the light novels, you're going to be missing out if you don't see the anime necessarily, but that they really do offer different things. Like I would call the anime just an excellent adaptation of the story. Its action sequences are top notch and its soundtrack is unbelievable. It's Hiroyuki Sawano. I
Yeah.
want to say that Hiroyuki Sawano did Haikyuu, which also has an excellent soundtrack, though I might be wrong about that. Um,
I know
so
he
yeah,
did I know he did the soundtrack for Cabaneri of the Martyrs and Recreators and Attack on Titan.
yeah, and
He
Attack on Titan's the other really really famous one.
Yeah,
Uh, but 86, he's a brilliant composer. Everything he does is great. So
pretty much.
yeah, he's it's worth watching just for that soundtrack alone. But even that, the action scenes are brilliantly done, and there's so many great directing choices. Entire blogs and websites have been dedicated to like analyzing the directorial choices of 86.
Mhm.
And deservedly so. There is so much work that the directors and everyone put into that anime, and yet even with all of that and all that the visuals add to it, I hesitate to say that it is just straight up better than the light novel because the light novel really does. And Bradford Walker, by the way, says Sawano did Gundam Unicorn. Yeah, Gundam Unicorn, I think, is one of the better regarded Gundams, so that makes some sense to me. But anyway, uh, I would say that the light novel really does have aspects to it that make it worth reading, even if you've watched the anime. There are a few different things. For one thing, that I noticed pretty quickly is you get a much better sense of how bad the Juggernauts are supposed to be. Like when you're watching the anime, they don't really have time to go into this. Like they can say, and they do, I think, in passing, that the Juggernauts are not supposed to be very good. But we only watch the Spearhead Squadron with them, and the Spearhead Squadron are the elite of elite with the Juggernauts, and especially Shin, who is like a magician with the Juggernaut. And this is canonically in the anime and the light novels. So I didn't really realize, or at least grasp, until I read the light novels, where they go on an extended, Asado, the author, goes on like an extended sequence where she specifically makes sure that she describes that these juggernauts are not just supposed to be bad, that they're like walking coffins, that they were basically designed almost to be bad. They did not put time or effort into them, that they are death traps, and that the fact that Shin is doing all of this stuff in his juggernaut should literally be impossible. Like
Yeah.
that what he is doing was actually genuinely not even intended for the Juggernaut to do. And Shin,
The Juggernaut should not be able to survive what he puts it through.
right? And they specifically go other way, and I think they might mention this like in the anime, but because you only ever see the Spearhead Squadron with the Juggernauts, it's hard to get that sense that like, oh, these are bad machines. But when you have a novel and you can elaborate on the backstory and what's happened to everything else, I think it comes across a little bit more clearly. The other thing that the
Yeah,
novel, and go ahead.
no, I was gonna say that for me, the difference between the anime and the light novels is like the difference between the Lord of the Rings movies and the Lord of the Rings the books. That you get a wider sense of Middle Earth through the books. You can nitpick about what they should and shouldn't have done with the movies, but the fact is they're still great movies and you can still enjoy them. With when you go to books, however, it's a deepening of what you see in the films,
I'd
a
agree
more
with this
perfect
with the
vision.
caveat. I would agree with this with the caveat that the Lord of the Rings is both a better book and a worse adaptation. But generally, I would agree as like a whole. I think that the
Yep.
Lord of the Rings movies make mistakes in adaptation that the '86 adaptation doesn't, and at the same time, and to be fair to Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings is just one of the probably the last great book written in English, and capital G great book,
Yeah.
as like genuinely contributing to the Western canon of literature, like written in the English language. In fact,
Mhm.
it's one of the only great books written in English. So, Jackson can only do so much, to be fair, but I also think that there were some unforced errors in the movies that I would say weren't there in the '86 anime, but they also had, in a weird way, like an easier job, because as good as the '86 anime is, and as much as I like it, it's also not the Lord of the Rings, which is just on another level. But
Yeah.
get your
Something more comparable to that might be A Princess of Mars and John Carter. Since I'm reading A Princess of Mars, I still love the John Carter movie. It's a great piece of cinema. There are some things in it that I can nitpick even now, but uh, A Princess of Mars is better in the way that it shows that the John Carter movie, the director really, really loved the book. I mean, reading the table of contents for A Princess of Mars, all I could think was, "Oh, so this is how you did the screenplay. This is what you built it off of." You basically the table of contents turned it into an outline with these as the scene heading names.
yeah,
So
and
it's pulp in a book to a pulp film, and 86 is a little like that. It's like we were talking about with the anime is pulp revolution stream, because the light novels are even reading them. It reminded me very strongly of Andre Norton, who was 1970s
mhm,
um, strong pulp fiction, although she started earlier.
yeah, and '86. Like the other really interesting thing that came across to me in the light novels that was sort of in the anime, but they just couldn't do it. Though I think I've seen some people who really analyze it and said that this was there in the visuals, and I can believe that.
Mhm.
To be to the anime, I was watching it sometimes, not paying close attention as I could, and that's one reason I am glad that I picked up the book too, because it helped me to really appreciate it. It's just a very well done story. But there are a lot, like, or at least maybe a lot is wrong, but there are noticeable biblical references. How about that? Noticeable might be a better word. Noticeable biblical references in 86.
In the anime, yeah. The closest we probably get is just the name of the legion.
Yeah, and it's more explicit in the light novels, and it's pretty fascinating. It's fascinating to me because Japan is known for being very iffy about religion, and yet, like, Asado doesn't really reference any religions but Christianity. And sure, it's there in the background, but it's portrayed in a generally sympathetic way, I think. Or at least mildly sympathetic. Yeah.
She is pretty sympathetic. In the light novel number 9, we're going to get the holy theocracy of I can't remember the rest of the countries. Um, so she has some. I think it's around book 5 or 6. She starts bringing in more Germanic myth references. Even so, she does she for the first 4 books she's extremely sympathetic and capitalizes on Christianity's effect on the West, which is highly unusual
Yeah.
no matter whether you're reading a light novel or anything written here. It's fantastic in the first book, and though it is
Yeah, it's
maybe
interesting too. The Republic is called the Republic of San Magnolia, and of course, San is saint, right? And Saint Magnolia, this is like a thing that's again more in the books than in the anime. And in the anime, it's
mhm,
there; it's not removed. But like Saint Magnolia is kind of a figure in the light novel, and there's more of a sense in the light novel. Like one thing about 86 is that the Republic of San Magnolia is just a horrible, horrible place, and they make it very, very clear. And I think it's really interesting, by the way, that Asado makes a republic a corrupt
yeah.
country. That is very rare. You normally don't see that, and I appreciate that she did that. But anyway, that the Republic of San Magnolia is basically a dystopia by the time we see it. They are in the end stages of a decline. They are on the
Mhm,
verge of collapse, and they just don't know it yet. And it looks as if they're even, they make a point of saying that, like, when they're almost overrun by the Legion, that doesn't even really count as revenge because they still don't realize what they did wrong. But then
mm,
the Federacy, the neighboring country, comes in and kind of rescues them,
yeah.
and they force them to be held accountable. So, in weirdly, it's kind of a happy-ish ending. We'll get to that in a little bit because I do want to discuss the ending because it was interesting to me. But anyway,
The
so
Repub There's actually some stuff that, people have noticed about the Republic of San Magnolia. Um, it's she drew on several things to make it. Obviously, the parallels between San Magnolia and, certain Reich, uh, stand out. It has many parallels to,
yeah, Nazi Germany. I
yeah,
mean, it's
Nazi
very
Germany. But
it's
the other
very
thing
explicit.
very explicit, very, very clear. The other thing, however, is or the law that's passed that sends the 86 to the 86th district is actually based on Executive Order 906, um, signed by President Roosevelt in the 1940s, which stripped Japanese Americans of their rights and put them in internment camps. So this was, one of the big influences on her story. Uh, San Magnolia, sorry, Saint Magnolia, as you were saying, bears some resemblance to Joan of Arc, which actually brings in something that not many people seem to notice or talk about. They talk about the fact that magnolia flowers, which is the namesake of the country, are the state flower of many states in the American South and the national flower of North Korea. So these are other things that had an effect on the story. And thing is, and you see it, I don't know if it's mentioned in the anime, the city where Lena is living is the city of Liberté et Égalité, which is taken from the French national motto Liberté, Égalité, and Fraternity.
Yeah,
Liber- Liberty, very,
equality
very
and
tempted to quote A Tale of Two Cities. Stop. Brain, shut up. But the parallels between France and the Republic of San Magnolia stand out very much with Saint
Mhm.
Saint Magnolia, Joan of Arc, the names of the cities. There's a later city that we see in book 4, Cherit, and the flag actually for San Magnolia, the 5-color flag, which is supposed to represent, um, I gotta find
Yeah, there's an
this.
exact quote. It was very similar to the liberty, equality, fraternity thing, though.
Yeah,
Uh, the first Bible reference that we get in the book, to my recollection, is one of the 86. I can't recall who, but one of the
uh,
86 says something like, there's a quote from some insufferable Messiah. He said, "Man cannot live by bread alone." That's all he says about it. Some
yeah,
insufferable
that's
Messiah.
that's Raiden, Shin's
Yeah,
second.
and he says, he goes, he would tend to ignore it because he doesn't believe in all that religion crap. But maybe there is something. He goes, maybe there is something to that.
Hmm.
You know, and he kind of, so that's the first time we see that the Bible is being quoted in a way that isn't entirely negative. Like they've clearly lost, the context of the Bible. Like they refer to it as an insufferable Messiah, and clearly nobody there is actually following the religion. But
Right.
then it's kind of fascinating because like they're not following the religion, but the unlike a lot of like far futures that are imagined by people, like the Bible has not been lost. They're able to quote it and recognize quotes from it. And in fact, the 86 are surprisingly like knowledgeable because later when they're about to go into battle against the Legion, uh, Shin starts quoting the Bible. He says a line came to him, and he goes, "What is your name?" And then one of them responds to him and says, "Shin, dude, that's really creepy. Do you know why?" And Shin goes, "No, just for some reason this verse came to mind, but I don't know why." And they go, "Because the response to that line is, I am Legion, for we are many." And the enemy they're fighting is the Legion. Now, this is a very, very on the nose biblical reference, but to be fair to Asado, these stories are being marketed towards a Japanese audience who might not recognize the biblical reference immediately, like I did.
Yeah,
I see Legion, I immediately think of the devil, right? Okay,
yeah,
that's from the Bible, that's the verse. But maybe if you're Japanese, you don't. So now they've just made that explicit, and that's fine. And the more you learn about how the Legion work and what they are, it is very, very obviously meant to be like, people who the Legion is like damned souls, right?
yeah,
They need to like free them from their suffering, that sort of thing. And they have that as a biblical reference. So these enemies that they're facing, it's like it's kind of interesting too because the Republic, while they are not the good guys. Not only are they not the good guys, the Republic are absolutely monstrous in the story. Literally,
you
like
want them to you want them to get wiped out. They're just
yeah,
monsters.
oh yeah, you want them to get wiped out. The only one that you like at all is Lena and sort of kind of Annette, and even her, not really. Uh,
Yeah, she
and
doesn't get much better. I mean, you tolerate her, but Annette is just kind of okay. We've got a third wheel for some reason.
Yeah, and the third biblical reference, and I could be missing one. There might have been other more subtle ones, but the third that I remember being very clear in the story, and this is not in the anime. They don't say this, but
Hmm.
because it's in. And to be fair to the anime, they couldn't say this unless they wanted to do something really clunky, like have Mina narrate her thoughts out loud,
Yeah.
which she doesn't
Ugh.
do, because this is in her head. She thinks of this. Uh, she goes to her friend Annette. So the 86 are marching off to their deaths. It's at the end of the story. They have been ordered to go on a quote unquote recon mission, but in reality, they've just been ordered to go off and just never come back and keep walking till they're overrun by Legion and die. And
Yep.
Lena is desperately trying to come up with some way to help them. And she has realized finally, like she's finally grasped kind of the fundamental difference between herself and the 86, which was something that she was really struggling with before. And that's that she none of her excuses for why she's doing what she's doing matter to the 86 at all. These little courtesies that she gives them don't matter to the 86 at all because they are
Hmm.
dying and she is not helping them. She might be helping them temporarily, she might be helping them to survive a little bit longer, but ultimately she is not doing anything to save them from the situation that they are in. And it's taken her like the entire novel to grasp this difference. And it makes sense, right? Like, this is where she's grown up and she's trying. You know, one thing to remember too is that Lena is a kid. She is a 16-year-old girl. Like, that is not
Yeah.
even a high school senior, that's a high school junior. You know, and she is trying, to be fair to her. And even the 86 recognize that she's trying, but they're ultimately just not that sympathetic because, you know, she's not doing anything, right? You're being our handler and you're helping us, and sure, you're treating us nicer, but who cares? We're dying and you're not, right? And the only
Yeah.
handler that they really seemed to respect was, I believe, Lena's father, because
No,
he
no,
died.
not Lena's father. The only handler they actually respect is Lena, but she earns that through growing beyond her initial
I thought it was their
minor
previous handler
pleasantries.
went into battle with them, and that was her father, and that's how he died, wasn't it?
No,
Or am I
he
mixing
died.
up?
No, he died. He died making a very terrible mistake as a father. He couldn't. He was trying. This was near the start of the war when Lena was around 10 and Shin was around the same age. He'd been going to the government. He'd been telling them this is evil. You've got to stop this inhuman. He couldn't get them to listen. Helicopter with Lena, and mind you, she's 10 thereabouts, to take her out and show her the battlefield at night because the Legion don't operate at night. They're solar powered. So sometimes they'll do night attacks or they'll start attacks early in the morning or carry them on late into the evening. But for the most part, as soon as the sun's down, there's no more Legion attacks. So he figured, okay, it's night. We can take it over and I can show my daughter this and we can figure something out to help them. But and this is made clear in the book. It's leveled as an accusation by her father's best friend in the anime. And is that Lena's father forgot that anyone can die on the battlefield. He had started to project along with the others unconsciously that only the 86 could die. So their chopper was shot down,
Okay, yeah,
and
then I missed.
and that's how he was
Yeah,
killed.
yeah. Okay, then I
There's a
misunderstood.
fan theory going around about that too, but I think I'll save that for later.
Okay, so yeah, finally, though, to get what I was saying is that at the end of the story, because now Lena has finally grasped this fundamental difference that essentially, if you're not going to help them and actually help them, and even more like not just treat them with civility, not just show sympathy, but do everything that you can to help to prevent their deaths, the 86 just are not going to care. And why would they? So finally, at the end of the story, with Annette, this is going to the biblical reference I was mentioning. Annette has a connection with Shin from her childhood, who is
Yeah.
the Shin is the 86, who is the leader on the battlefield and the best 86. It's the shortest way to
Yeah,
put it.
he's the best of the 86 and he's the head of Spearhead Squadron.
Right. So she has a connection with Shin from her childhood, and her connection is that as a child, first she rejected Shin, uh, and then later when they ask her family considers taking in Shin's family and hiding them, similar to, you know, Nazi Germany families
Hmm.
taking in and hiding them. And Annette tells him not to because she says, I don't want to deal with this kid. And, you know, to be fair to Annette, she was literally like a young child at the time, and it's really her parents' fault. Like, the fact that they took her opinion on this into account at all is pretty ludicrous.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. But Annette has been carrying this around. Yeah.
Hmm.
So now we have this third situation, uh, where Lena asks Annette again begs her for help, and Annette says no. And says, I'm not going to help you because there's nothing you could do. And Lena realizes that the reason that Annette, even though Annette is sympathetic to the plight of the 86 too, the reason she keeps saying this is because she feels guilty because she could have helped and she didn't. So in order to deal with that, she needs to tell herself that she couldn't help. She couldn't help. But Lena has finally reached the point where she realizes that this is no excuse, that they in fact can help, and that unless they do everything in their power to help, they are part of the problem. So she goes back to Annette and she tells her, Shin, that boy that you sent out there is on that battlefield. And 3 different times I have asked for your help with him, and you have said no. He goes, and this time you're going to help me. Otherwise, he is going to die. Like, this is like, I'm not giving you a choice right now. And I know you. I don't care that you're mad at me. You're going to do this. You're going to help me. And Annette eventually is angry at Lena, but she does go and she does help because, this is her opportunity. And Lena compares Annette to Peter denying Jesus 3 times.
Yeah. I actually have the lines right here. The one that Lena speaks out loud is, but if you do think this concerns you, then help me. And decide quickly. If you take your time, the roosters will start to crow. Then she thinks to
Yeah,
herself, have said you don't care about me anymore another 3 times.
yeah, exactly. So they specifically draw the comparison to, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. But to be fair to Annette, like Peter, she ends up coming back and helping and saves the 86's lives indirectly, obviously
Yeah.
with help. Uh, After her 3 denials, but I think it's interesting that they draw that very direct biblical reference. And I do love this moment for Lena because it's Lena like she finally kind of grasps at this point in the story, like why do the 86 seem to not like me, right? Like why aren't I'm trying to be on their side, and she doesn't say this directly. I think that she has enough, I guess, social tact to realize that to say it out loud like that is, at the very least nasty, but it's still kind of in the back of her mind
Mm.
like I'm not doing anything wrong, right? And even I think Shin even tells her that later. Like he goes, "We know that it's not really your fault." And they make a distinction here where they mention that Lena, we know you're not a bad person, but they also don't call her a good person. And she's
Right.
like, not that this is my goal or anything, but why? Why not? I don't get it. And now she finally realized it because they have to die, and no matter what her excuse is, she is not helping them. So finally,
Yeah.
she helps them. She actually provides firepower that saves their lives, that were against the rules, that she was not allowed to do. But from the perspective of the 86, it's literally the least she could do. Because her consequences are she will get in trouble. And to be honest, she doesn't even get into that bad trouble.
Yeah,
Like,
house arrest.
yeah, she goes under house
And
arrest and
she
then
even gets to leave on house arrest.
yeah, she gets out of it fairly quickly because once it becomes clear, way too late to the Republic, that the Legion are actually a threat that's going to take them down.
Yeah.
Lena becomes literally by far and arguably the only competent leader in the entire Republic. So
Yeah.
they kind of have to use her. They have no other choice, and they say the Republic falls, but it's kind of odd because the Republic doesn't really fall. It sort of
It
almost
does.
falls, and then the
It does.
Federacy. Right?
Yeah, it does. It in a way, the only reason it doesn't completely collapse and isn't wiped off the face of the earth is Lena, because
Yeah,
nobody nobody in command listened to her reports. She was very dutiful. She filed the. These are the black sheep. These are the legion that have the engrams of the dead that you won't let be buried because they're in their processors. So they think better than the white sheep, the normal legion that are just programmed. And then there's the shepherds, which were taken from people who were dying or not quite dead, and their brains hadn't had a chance to decay. And these are the guys in command telling the black sheep and the white sheep where to go and how to move. And so she tells everybody this, but of course, Command's not listening. And they add in season 2 that she had some help from other people. I don't know if she actually. The books aren't quite clear how many other people may or may not have been helping her out, but because there isn't the Republic who joins the fight later on ends up under Anju's command. Some help, but that it was so pitifully few that basically the only one in charge. She plays Joan of Arc essentially. She's the only reason that the Republic there's anything for the federal oh shoot the Federacy to rescue is because Lena stood her ground and said, "Okay, all the 86 who can come here and help me fend off fence out the Legion." Um, and she by this point she's managed to make her she's been given command of another squadron because her punishment for saving Spearhead with the I think of the with the bombardment amounted to a slap on the wrist, and she got given a new squadron to command. And because she commanded so well, casualty rates of any handler in the Republic. Sorry, almost slipped into Star Wars there. Because of that, she earned those 86's loyalty. That squadron became known as the Queen's Knights, and because they gave Lena for her 86 style leadership her own personal name, Bloody Reina, the Bloodstained Queen. And so I think I've lost the thread. But the whole reason that San Magnolia exists at all, that there's anybody left, is Lena stood up and took charge.
Yeah. She, I think it's described in the novel as and we see the scene done wonderfully in the anime too, by the way, but in a great, little flash forward moment. We see Lena, organizes a defensive, basically turns everybody, I think, into one district, if I recall, and, utilizes the X to make, a defensive wall around the district and holds out long enough for the Federacy to come and save them. Now, what's interesting to me is that the light novel, which, you mentioned to me, and this made perfect sense, the light novel actually does end at a technically later place than we're even at in the anime. So, the light novel has 2 epilogues, and the epilogues reveal that what happens to the Republic. Now, this is something that if you were to watch the anime, they don't actually tell you yet. We see the Republic getting overrun, and Lena leading the 86 to defend the last remnants of the Republic, but we don't know what happens next yet. Yeah, but the light novels tell us that Lena manages to hold out long enough for the neighboring Federacy, which was the empire that they thought that was defeated. As it turns out, they formed a new government as a republic themselves, and they're doing much better. And they come and they rescue them, and they very nearly leave them to die when they figure out what they were doing to the 86. But they decide not to, partially because of Lena. And Lena ends up joining the Federacy as a colonel, I believe. So
yeah, I think so.
The final reveal, the last twist of the book, and it ends it on kind of a happy note, which is an odd choice for such a dark story. It ends it with the last we see of the Spearhead Squadron 86, the original 86, is them marching off into the sun. They're almost certainly going to die. Lena assumes that they are going to die. She goes out even and finds where they've been, the remnants of their robots, and assumes, well, I guess that's them. They must have died here, and leaves flowers there and everything, So they have all of that. And in the light novel, she goes and she joins the Federacy military, and she meets them, and it ends with the reveal that at least some of the Spearhead Squadron are alive and are
Yeah.
in the Federation army. And that's how the story ends. It's actually like an upbeat ending. Because, it reveals like that not everything that Lena did was in vain, that the Spearhead Squadron did manage to, at least some of them, make it out alive. Now, in the anime and in the later books of the light novels, when Asato had time to flesh out her story, we figure out what happened to them, and as you could probably guess, they were rescued by the Federacy, which is how they got there. And I guess that was always kind of a possibility, now that we know that the Federacy exists, which we didn't originally. It's not that happy of an ending, though. Like, yeah, Spearhead Squadron's alive, and Lena is alive, but they also, it's kind of odd, and I wonder if the light novels eventually address this. There's still no real clear way to actually defeat the Legion. Like, Lena does have methods that are working better than the other fighters, but ultimately, the real problem with the Legion is that when you destroy them, if they kill somebody and that body is not removed from the battlefield, they could copy their brains and then use them to repair themselves. So essentially, every time they kill someone, they also get a free repair, and they're very good at killing people. And they don't really come up with a solution to this problem. Like, the story
Not in
just
book
kind of
one.
ends. What was that?
Not in book one.
Yeah, not in book one. You're right. But
Yeah,
I'm talking by the
because
epilogue. By epilogue 2, there's like no real solution for it. Just, the Federacy is going to continue fighting, and it's like, this seems like, that seems to be the major problem. I mean, that's what led to the defeat of, or the near defeat, or defeat, whatever you want to call it, of San Magnolia, is that they had no idea that they could do that. And the 86 knew, but the 86 really only told Lena because, honestly, because Lena was the only one that they were interested in telling, because they don't really care if San Magnolia is overrun. They're being forced into this
and
war.
handlers ignore them. In fact, you see it in the intro to the first episode of the anime. The handler before Luna was cheering on Spearhead Squadron to die. So most of the handlers are like that, and you see it in the anime. It's mentioned in the books
Yeah.
that they spend their time drinking, they spend their time watching movies. They don't even bother to resonate unless they want to watch the pigs, quote unquote, die, because that's what they consider the 86 unevolved pigs in human form. So we can get into the weeds on the Legion, but yeah, it looks like since 86 was a submission to the 23rd Dengeki Novel Prize. It won the grand prize. So it looks like Asato wrote this as a one-off in case move forward with it, but if it didn't win, she could go on to something else. So that's probably why the episodes.
Yeah, that's why, like, the epilogues actually bring the story to a pretty, I don't know, thorough conclusion. Like, don't get me wrong, there is tons and tons and tons of blank spaces that you can include story, and that's exactly what she did. But if the story had just ended with the first book, like, it would have made for a satisfying ending, if a little bit rushed,
Mhm.
by necessity. But, like, I would have been satisfied with that ending. But I think it's just very interesting that Asato chose to end book one on such an optimistic, upbeat note, because the story was honestly just so dark. It's an incredibly dark story. I've mentioned before, and I still think that you would like it. Iron-Blooded Orphans.
Yeah.
Is
I've got to watch
very,
that.
yeah. And Lena, now that we're talking about it, and I was thinking of it before, and after reading the novel, Lena, it reminds me strikingly of Princess Cadelia of Iron-Blooded Orphans, the
Mhm.
Gundam series.
I've got to
Yeah,
watch that. That's on the short list, and I think
it's
I'm gonna bump it up a bit.
yeah, Princess Cadelia of Ironblood Orphans. So, what the plot of Ironblood Orphans, when you're going to see, I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again partially for the viewers, too, for people who
Hmm.
don't know. The plot of Ironblood Orphans, you'll notice very quickly the similarities to 86, that it is so similar to the point that I cannot imagine that she was not aware of Ironblood Orphans when she came up with 86. Now, keep in mind, I do think 86 is better, but we'll get to that in a moment. And I like Ironblood Orphans a lot, but I still think 86 is probably better. But anyway, in Ironblood Orphans, it's about a group of children who are kind of working as slaves, as warriors almost, with Gundams, of course, 'cause it's a Gundam show, with Gundams. In these children are getting fed up of the way they're I believe they're Martian or something. I can't recall exactly. It's been years since I watched it, which is a shame. I really should try and get back into it. But anyway, the it's been so these children who are working for like a I don't know, I guess a security company is the best way to put it. You know, they're fighting all the
Hmm.
time Gundams. Finally, now they're like all either teenagers or just about to be teenagers, just like around the age of the 86. You know,
Hmm.
and they decide that they're tired of the abuse and they're going to take over the company themselves. And in one of the scene that kind of sold me on the show,
Hmm.
they have this moment where all of the people who were running the company wake up in a shed, all tied up, and the orphans are there in front of them, armed, and they tell them, "All right, here's what's gonna happen. This is our company now. We're gonna run the show from now on. Me and Misazuki here, who are the two main characters. Get the first guy's name. Misazuki was the second lead though. But anyway, they go, we're gonna be the leaders here, and that's it. That's how it's gonna be from now on. You're gonna have to deal with that. We'll send you on your way. So one of the guys who they tied up starts yelling at them like, "You scum! You absolute pieces of trash! You think?" And then he nods at Misazuki and goes, "Go ahead." And Misazuki just takes out his gun and caps the dude in the head. And then goes, "Anybody else want to complain?" Everybody else there is just sitting there silent, petrified. They're like, right, now glad we've decided that. So the story, Orga, thank you. Yeah, Orga. So the story is that now they're like working as kind of a security company. Think private mercenaries almost. And their first job is that a princess named Princess Cadelia is trying to make her way to Mars. And the reason that she needs to make it to Mars is to fight for the rights of the Martians on the planet. So, great, obvious, and the reason she needs protection is because it's a hotbed political issue, and they're going to try and assassinate her. Okay, great, you got a
Yeah.
story. Princess
Hmm.
Cadelia is very reminiscent of Lena. In retrospect, I didn't really think of this at the time until after I read the novel. But now I'm like, I, I cannot imagine that she did not have Princess Cadelia in mind because the similarities are so striking. Like, there is a scene that could have come straight from 86, with the one exception that Lena never actually meets the 86 till literally the final page of the story. Uh, But with that exception, there's a scene that could have come straight from 86 where Cadelia is like introducing herself to the orphans, and she tries to shake Mikazuki's hand, and Mikazuki won't shake her hand. And he goes, "My hands are greasy and dirty. You don't want to shake my hand." And Cadelia is confused and goes, "No, what are you talking about? I don't mind." And then he's just like, "No, no, you don't get it. You don't want to shake my hand." And he walks away. And Cadelia is just like, "What did I do? I don't understand."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, that scene could have come straight from 86.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I gotta see the anime.
It's a good show. It's a very good show. I mentioned before that it has like a very weird, very specific problem in that it
Hmm.
sets up plot points sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, and then knocks them down like within the same episode or in back-to-back episodes that are then treated by everybody like it's a really big deal. And it's a very weird and very specific problem that is not particularly common, and I do not know why the show suffers from this particularly. Uh, Season 1 was excellent, though, overall. 86 is better, it's more tightly plotted. I think that's the main thing. The action scenes are better. Though not that the action scenes in I One Orphans are bad by any means, they're very good, but 86 has superb action scenes. And
Yeah.
the other thing is that, of course, the soundtrack of 86 is A+, but the main thing is that even I think that the writing is just tighter in 86. Thematically it's tighter. Not that the characters in 86, not that all of them are like super well characterized, but Lena and Shin are very, very, very well done. I think Shin, especially
Yeah.
in the later stories. I do have some issues with Lena. Like this is, and they're kind of nitpicks, but I think they're legitimate nitpicks. Like I mentioned this to you before, and I said I'm going to criticize the story here for this. I think Lena is just too young. I understand that the
You
Republic
did
is
mention
supposed,
that.
yeah, like I understand the Republic is supposed to be decadent and at the end of its life cycle, so and all of that. But Lena would have been a junior in high school, and she is a major. That is insane. Like that's actually like ludicrously insane. We're talking something that people make like in their 40s. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Nina is a 16-year-old and she is a major. And not only that, she's like leading these troops when they make it a point of she has never had long conversations with boys before because she's that sheltered. And I get it. I get that the idea is that the Republic is promoting her because of family, and also she's a prodigy too. But like there is a
Yeah.
limit. Yeah, it's partially her family, partially because handler is considered a cushy job that she doesn't even really need to try that hard at.
Yeah.
Partially because they're super corrupt. But for a military to have a 16-year-old girl uh, in that position just does not quite pass the smell test to me. It
No,
just
no,
like
sorry.
just a few years older, I think would have been better. But it's a nitpick. I admit it's a trope, and it's one that they at least go a little. They make a little bit of effort in justifying, so it's not entirely excused. But at the same time, I don't know. It kind of bothered me. It also made the 86 seem a little bit meaner to me because like they're speaking to her like that. And I'm like, this is an actual child that is being thrust into this situation. And not that that's really the 86's fault, but it's also like because they're children too, obviously.
Yeah.
But again, with the 86, I don't think it's a problem because that's the entire point. For one
Yeah.
thing, it's the whole plot point that it needs to be children because the adults are all dead at this point.
Dead or
And
infirm, and they
yeah,
can't they on the wall anymore.
right, exactly. And for another thing, they don't really consider the 86 human anyway, so who cares if they're children, adults, or whatever, so long as they can saddle up. Uh,
Yeah. And then die.
yeah, exactly. So but the fact that she was 16-year-old was just a little, like a tiny, tiny bit made me go, oh, I really don't like that. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I've
Ultimately,
seen I've seen other people mention that that's a problem too, and I get it. If maybe if she hadn't made her a major, it would work better. But as things stand, you go along with it because the story's great, but at the same time, it does not pass the smell test.
yeah, and again, I'm being pretty nitpicky here too, because I do think that Asado did know that, at least on some level, but I do think it's also a little bit forced. Like, she wanted her main character to be 16, so she's gonna be 16. And I think the reason she wanted her to be 16 is very obvious. It's because Asado, in the afterword of the light novel version that you linked to me, so I assume you have as well, and that I have,
Yeah.
Asado actually calls like 86 at least partially a romance, which is
Hmm.
funny. The only real romantic aspect to it is Lena and Shin very occasionally, and sort of kind of Karina, but not really. Uh, Karina
Oh,
has a crush on Shin that is not reciprocated, or at least they don't take the time to show that he reciprocates. But Lena and
he
Shin,
doesn't.
yeah, Lena and Shin definitely do have a bit of a romantic connection. But even then, like, to be honest, it's really only like 2 scenes total, and she doesn't actually meet Shin, so they don't even know what each other really look like. So, like, she has an idea, from people's descriptions, but she hasn't actually seen him, and they haven't actually seen her. So it's kind of it is but Asado at the end of the book does say that at least partially it is, she considers it like romance to be one of the
Girl.
subgenres of the book, I
Yeah,
guess.
boy. Yeah, she says you have battles and mechs and a boy meets girl story and a dystopia and so much
Yeah,
more.
yeah, exactly. So she does consider it, at least on some level, a boy meets girl story, and not that she's wrong exactly, but I find that kind of funny because like there's so little of it there. But and I
It's
think the main reason that she wanted
advanced to
more.
this to start with. It kind of you get to see it grow further along with the books, and it's very interesting to watch its handle than a lot of other romances today, actually. Because
Yeah, it's
yeah,
odd too. I think that's the main reason that she made Lena 16 though. I think she wanted the romance between
pro-
Lena and Shin.
yeah, probably.
Making
Which
Shin 16, Shin needed to be a child for the story to work thematically, that it was like these children who were being forced into the war. And Lena, technically, the story could have worked if Lena was older, but then you can't have your romance, so
not without
let's
it
make
being
Lena.
weird.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose if you really, really needed to do it because that romance was that important to you, then I guess that's better than the alternative. But I don't know.
It's
It's still,
really it's the only part where it wobbles, actually, I think. And you can ignore the wobble if you really get invested in the story because it's just too cool. Um,
yeah, yeah, I would agree. And she's right. Like she says at the end, I want to write a story with a little bit of everything. Credit to Asado. She really, really does.
mhm,
The And I think that the fact that there are biblical references in it, I am pretty fascinating. One thing I do see is that in Japan, they are, of course, famously not as religious as the West. Even now, to an extent, Christianity just kind of permeates our society in a way that it doesn't in Japan. And
mhm.
people might not know that it permeates our society anymore, but we were founded on it and everything. And Japan was not. Japan's history with Christianity was violent and complicated. Uh, and involved a lot of martyrs. And weirdly, as depressing as it sounds, it's like, the church almost likes to boast that the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. And it's a very bold claim, and it is true to a large extent because the martyrs in the early days of the Roman Empire inspired the early Christians, caused the church to grow even further. When they saw that people were willing to die for their faith. Well, Japan, their history with Christianity is that they kind of figured out the secret, as weird as that sounds, to stopping Christianity from growing. And that was that they
Yeah,
were killing people in secret, and they were forcing them to, if you want the torture of other people to stop, then you need to apostatize. And they tried to make it as glamorous as possible, right?
yeah.
So you can see this in the movie Silent and in the book Silence, which is a good historically accurate version of it. And you can what they did was they would have these priests lined up, and they would be like torturing them brutally, like one by one. And then they would have whoever, somebody else there, and go, all you got to do is step on the image of Christ, and it stops. And they would do this secretly so that it wasn't something that you could like use as an example to your friends, right? That
Yeah.
you withstood it. And it was also, it wasn't to you, it was to other people. And that's all they cared about. They didn't care about anything else. Just if you step on the image of Christ, we'll stop the tortures. And most of them did.
Mhm.
And nor am I judging them for this decision, by the way. Can you imagine? I honestly can't, and I'm glad of that because it's a horrifying thing to even think of.
Yeah.
But so I have no judgment, but they kind of figured out the secret to stopping Christianity in its tracks, and as a result, Christianity is not gone in Japan,
But it is
but
very, very
yeah, it's not very common.
yeah,
And when it
it's
shows up,
very
it's pretty
my
interesting to see because it's always being explored from an outside perspective. That's why Trigon is so good. It's
mhm.
like Christianity being explored from the perspective of somebody who is observing all of it and trying to figure out if it works and why it works, if that makes sense. Seeing it in 86 is pretty interesting because it's really the only religion that's brought up, uh, which I think is an interesting choice. I mean, she could have brought up Buddhism, she could have brought up Islam, which, by the way, I'd actually love to see a Japanese take on Islam, but I don't think Islam ever really got any footholds in Japan at any point. The
I
Christians
think
did.
yeah, I think they actually actively say you can't come in here to the Muslims.
Yeah,
They have
so
a 0, uh,
a zero
they
tolerance
pretty
policy.
much banned them. They really they don't like them.
Yeah, and in a way, I actually would be fascinated in seeing what a Japanese take on Islam would be. Like, I would really be interested in seeing that in the anime, but you never see it because they just never got a foothold there because the Japanese won't let them in. And I think that the Muslims were concerned with expanding around them more, whereas because is not to I'm going to generalize here, but I think it's a fair and correct generalization. Islam spread by the sword in a large
Yeah,
way. Uh, Christianity spread by the sword when they were fighting people who were persecuting Christians, but they also
yeah,
spread through missionaries. And Islam could not attack Japan; it was too far away.
yeah,
So there was no way that they could forcibly convert them. And I'm not going to say there are no Muslim missionaries because I know for a fact that isn't true. But
mhm,
I don't think that they have the missionary presence that Christianity has. I think that is fair to say. They don't have the type of missionary culture that
yeah,
Christianity has, and I mean both Protestant and Catholic Christianity.
mhm,
Catholic Christianity has orders that are dedicated to cross country evangelization, and Protestants tend to have their own organizations that are specifically dedicated to this, including people who I know who went to Japan, of all places. Merg Magalramaxis says in our chat, the situation in Japan was also weird because there was a Protestant versus Catholic dynamic in play there. That is absolutely correct.
yeah,
And during the time Christianity was brought in Japan. Yes, he is right. That is true. There was the Dome Tokuyama, the samurai saint, or he will probably soon be the samurai saint. He is Blessed Dome Tokuyama. He was a samurai who converted to Christianity and tried to convert as many of his subjects and vassals to Christianity as well. And he served a higher warlord, I forget who, someone actually who was kind of famous, at least mildly famous. And
but
well,
no one got oh,
I
shoot,
don't
I
think it
missed
was Nobunaga
this.
who's the most. I know, yeah, he's the most famous of all, but I don't think it was him. Uh,
Okay, yeah, it's
with
just I
that
know
said,
him better than his last name.
yeah, I know who you're talking about, but I don't think it was him. Uh, with that said, Dome Takayama, his story. I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's an interesting tangent, so I'm okay with it because Dome Takayama's a fascinating saint. I really enjoyed learning about him.
Mhm,
Dome Tokuyama, uh, he's known as the Samurai Saint. Technically, he's a blessed still. He's almost certain to be canonized relatively soon. Like within the next 10 years or so, he'll probably be canonized, which is great news. I think he should be. But anyway, he served under a higher warlord and he fought very loyally, but he his Christianity was for the most important thing in his life, and he managed to convert a lot of his subjects to Christianity. So the fact that he was converting, even though he was very loyal, that made him very suspicious. And they tried to get him to renounce his Christianity. They would order him to do various things, and Tokiyama's writings are full of him saying things like, he was a very, very polite person, very Japanese in that sense, right? Very loyal to his warlord. But they asked him about his conversion to Christianity, and he says, "As for the people who I've converted, no, I will not leave my faith," because they did order several other samurai to leave their faiths, and they did, and he refused. And he says, "And as for the people you mentioned who I converted, that is the feat that I am most proud of anything else that I have accomplished in my life, more than my victories in battle or anything else. The fact that I have converted so many people is the part of my life that I am most proud of." So this just made him way too suspicious, and he was loyal enough that they didn't kill him outright, but he was exiled from Japan to the Philippines. And I think, I want to say 300 of his followers went with him. He was exiled, and he died in the Philippines, and I believe he was declared a martyr because it was, they decided after some debate, it was a kind of a debatable thing if he should be considered a martyr, but they decided after some debate that when he traveled over, the strain of the travel and was what caused the illness that killed him, and the reason that he was forced to leave was because he was a Christian. So that, he died for his faith, therefore he is a martyr, but was kind of a controversial thing. But there was no controversy when he was in the Philippines. The governor of the Philippines actually offered to invade Japan for him, and he had to step in and go, no, don't do that. I don't want you to do that. Like that, I do not support that position, which is kind of funny. Murgnagle says, Shinrikyo's beliefs, the gas attack in the trains, and the stuff related to that may have scarred the Japanese in relation to Western religions. That is very true. There's a lot of history there, and it's very dicey. The Christians were not always the good guys either. In this time in Japan, it was It was a very complicated time.
Yeah.
But yeah, the point is though, they did kind of figure out the trick, quote unquote, to stopping Christianity from spreading.
Yeah, it's interesting. I knew I'd read it somewhere. I had to go back and find Shin's trivia. But one reason that there are so many references, you even catch Shin reading All Quiet on the Western. He's reading that is Asato read it. So a lot of the stuff that's in the books comes from things she's read. All Quiet on the Western Front has so many parallels with 86. I know I referenced it in one of my articles. Philip K. Dick's Second Variety had an impact. Stephen King's The Mist. I don't know about Mori Ogai's Takasabun or Thou Shalt Not Die by Akiko Yasano, but she also read Mein Kampf. Credit to her.
Yeah.
The Principles of Quantum Mechanics by Paul Dirac that was the manga. And then it lists the Bible, so she read enough about it that she could include these references, and she does so. I agree that the mention regarding Legion is on the nose, but it's actually kind of sweet to read, even if it is on the nose. It could possibly be critiqued on a technical level, but the way she does it is
I find it on the nose, but if you're Japanese, you might not know the reference at all, in which case it makes a little more sense.
Yeah, but it hasn't the thing that makes it so sweet, because I went back and I reread it, and it strikes me as a very sweet way of slipping it in, not too over the head. She's not beating the reader over the head with it, and she's not waving a flag or being, what's the word? Um, Not being too subtle, not thumbing her nose at anybody or anything else. It's just a very almost matter of fact, which you don't get anymore um, in the West. I can't remember where I read it, but people have been talking quite a bit about how most of the Christianity that one sees portrayed in Hollywood and mainstream novels is very pop culture. It's very thin. It doesn't understand, or it portrays Christianity in a very flat and unflattering manner that is not at all accurate. And this, it might be the fact that, of course, I'm Catholic and I've seen them and I know the quote, but this feels as if Asato has at least half of what the reference means. The later reference to when the cock crows, you will have denied the original quote from Raiden about man does not live on bread alone.
Yeah,
It feels natural, which is
I agree.
especially in this climate is it's a treasure because you don't see that anymore. And actually, if anybody wanted to try and slip something like this in, I would recommend reading 86 by Asato Asato to get an idea. You don't have to do it the same way. Um, Plenty of other people do it in different ways, and they're more obvious. And but this is a very sweet and organic way, and I wish I could figure out a word for it, but it's not. Asato has only read the Bible and is not Christian. It doesn't say there's so either she is or she isn't. We don't know, but she treats it very respectfully, and that's
She
not something
does,
you see a
yeah.
lot.
She treats it very she treats it as if it's true, I guess. Like at least on some level. I don't know if that's exactly right. It is worth noting though that the quote that Raiden mentions of that he calls it said by an insufferable Messiah,
Hmm.
that man does not live by bread alone. That's not the full quote, of course. The
Yeah.
actual full quote, man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. And yet that is not how Raiden interprets it. He interprets it as, oh, man can't just live off of man doesn't just need food to survive, they need more than that. But that's not
Hmm.
and that is admittedly how a lot of people use the quote nowadays, I guess,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. However,
But it also even then it doesn't feel that she's not necessarily treating it as untrue.
oh no, well, it's partially
She does treat it as
Raiden.
true, but
Yeah,
yeah, she's very
it's
this is
Raiden saying.
yeah, and it's actually a testament to her skill because and you see this the more you read the books and the more you watch the anime, she's very good at how she handles certain people's perspectives. All the characters' perspectives, actually. She has the innocent, um, even later on when Lena is more experienced as a commander, she maintains a sort of innocent outlook on life, and Misato manages that. She manages Shin's more reserved and confused without appearing confused. Uh,
Right. Yeah, Shin ends
World.
up being the saddest character, and also because Shin is just undergoing this constant mental anguish because he's being bombarded 24/7 with the constant dying screams of people who were killed by the Legion, which
Yeah, and
is honestly, think about it for more than 5 seconds, is a horrifying concept. Which the to be clear, the books make a horrifying concept. Like
mhm,
they say that it's so bad that the last handler killed themselves because of it.
yeah, yeah, because and the thing too there is Shin turned the resonance up so that he could get the full blast. He normally keeps it down low so that his fellow squadron mates don't get overwhelmed. And he does the same for Lena, which is another sign that he's treating her differently than he would most of the handlers because
Partially, it was also partially, I think, that he was treating the previous handler differently because the previous handler was particularly cruel.
yeah.
So he mentions that I don't want them. I don't want to torture them. Like not that he seems to lose any sleep over the guy who dies, because in fact they all seem pretty happy about these. But when he's asked about it, I think he says something along the line of like, "I'm not trying to get them to kill themselves."
Yeah.
Like it's just and when Lena, of course, when she is first hit with it,
Hmm.
he of course tries to warn her away, and she won't do it. Lena literally collapses and
She
has a
has just
panic attack.
yeah, she has a screaming fit trying to block out the noise.
Yeah,
And
and this is implied, like this is a fraction of what Shin hears all the time. Now,
every day,
granted,
night and day.
yes, it mentions that it is much worse on the battlefield, but he's always hearing at least something.
That scene actually was good well when Lena first hears the voices of the Legion, and she has her panic attack in the terminal. You hear her saying, "This isn't static," when she's trying to figure it out, and then you hear a male voice. It's not anybody in the squadron, mommy. And then it goes on.
Yeah,
And all the screams start coming in, and you finally hear um, Kaie with
yeah.
her
I don't
final
want to
words,
die.
"Shinitakunai," the Japanese version, and it's always so quiet. And then of course they changed it up somewhat from the novels because in the novels she Lena doesn't have any more panic attacks, but she starts to get nauseous every time she thinks about putting the
Yeah,
to
the
resonate with the
resonance.
squadron. Yeah, but they actually have her have a second panic attack in the anime, which is very good, interesting too because it's implied that she's kind of absorbed this from Shin, which none of the others seem to have been able to do, but that she's absorbed all the it's not just the memory, it's like she absorbed some of it, and she herself is in her mind confronted by Kaie's ghost saying, "I don't want to die." And that's where they have her realize the final words she heard before Shin cut the link. And it's interesting that he's the one who cut the link. Part of it is, of course, she was having an utter panic attack and she couldn't do it. But the fact that he bothered means that um, he was concerned enough about her, despite the lack of them, to cut the link. So
Right,
that
exactly.
yeah, that was I even know I still think that was one of the best scenes in the entire anime.
My favorite scene in the anime was actually the final scene of season 2, which I thought was just wonderfully done on all fronts. And the final scene of season 1 was pretty excellent as well. Or the final fight with Shin and his brothers Legion was pretty good as well. There's
More
also the interesting there's an interesting theological thing going on that if they're fighting Legion and Shin hearing the voices of the people's last moments in Legion, there is this heavy implication here that like it's literally something demonic going on, that Legion is trapping damned souls at the worst moment of their lives and forcing them to relive it forever is kind
yeah.
of the implication. And Asado keeps it ambiguous if she's going in if it's a science fiction or fantasy thing intentionally.
Mhm.
I think is the correct call. Like Shin speculates that it's not really their souls that are being trapped, that it's just a copy of their brains that they're making, and because it happened to be at the moment of their death, that's the one thought that keeps crystallizing. But the reality is that the only reason that they're using it is so that they can repair themselves, and then it's
Yeah.
allowing them, but that they're it's not the original person. but he also doesn't seem to really believe that either. And then it's implied later, like he says that, and sure, logically makes sense, but when you're hearing the voices of the damned in your head all the time, it starts to get to you. And then we actually see from his brother's legion's point of view,
Yeah.
and it's heavily implied that his brother's legion, like, is in some sense very conscious, or like that. In fact, he's actually, and partially it's because he's a shepherd legion, so I think it's just implied that it's a little bit more. Trying to think of the word, more assembled, I guess, or more complex.
Yeah, his brain was less damaged than a lot of others they've taken.
Yeah.
This would get into spoiler territory, but you actually layer on, because you point out with the ending, we don't know how to beat the Legion.
Right.
Later on we find out that you can converse with the people who have been assimilated into the Legion
Well, we know this from
to
the
one
end of
degree.
season 2, right?
Yeah, it starts at the end of season 2, and actually you can probably count it there with the start of season 2, where he sees Ray for the last time when Ray says goodbye. It's actually a very poignant part of book 2, Run Through the Battlefield, part 1. That's book 2's title. But it's we and later on in book 5 we learned that the Northern Kingdom, oh phooey, I can't remember the name. Kingdom of Roa Gracia, there it is. That one of the princes has figured out how to make a sort of mechanical legion of his own, but these are mechanical dolls that are made, with one exception, to but to also stand out. And these people, because the only country to leave their war dead out for the Legion find is the Republic of San Magnolia. All the other countries eventually figured out that if they left the bodies of their dead out too long, the Legion would come, pick up the brains that were undamaged, and take them and put them in the processors. So they made a habit of, like Shin, if okay, we can't afford to retreat and take you home. You're dying anyway. We can't. So there's no way to get you back while you're still alive and let you die there. So we're going to shoot you just like now, euthanize you here, and come back and pick you up later. So the Legion can't get you. Which that's an interesting part of the entire story too. Is that technically you arguments about whether or not euthanizing someone is a good idea, and some circumstances you don't have a choice. This is again one of the places where there is no choice. If you leave them to die by inches,
Well,
or anything
yeah,
like
I think in
this,
this case, less I know what you're saying, but I think in
yeah,
this case, it's kind of less euthanization and more a defense mechanism so that their brains aren't taken over by the Legion.
yeah,
And
so that they're allowed to
again,
pass on and find rest.
there's a heavy implication here that, like, these are almost like souls of the damned who have been captured by the devil,
Hmm.
and they're literally, in hell. And when we get into, like, his brother's headspace, kind of,
Yeah.
in the end of the first novel, like, we
Hmm.
can see that his brother uh still has his memories,
Hmm.
like, it's unclear for that point if they have their memories or if it's just like the very last moment because that's what was on their mind, it's repeating. But no, his brother has his memories. I mean, it's even sort of just kind of implied that his brother isn't even evil, he's just kind of insane at that point. Like, he
Yeah.
mentioned something, and I remember seeing it's a really creepy line. It's in the anime as well, and it's also very creepy in the anime, where,
Yeah.
like, finally, I found you, Shin. Now I just need to remove that, pesky human form or something.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. That pesky human, that weak human shell, and it's like, oh
yeah,
crap.
yeah. So it's a super creepy line where his brother, like, seems to be genuinely trying to, like, apologize to Shin, and, beg Shin for his forgiveness, but because he's a Legion now, he's completely lost his mind, and he thinks that the way to do that is to kill him. And,
Actually,
that's that's what the Legion does to you.
yeah, and that's actually something we learned in the later books. I'm kind of wobbling there. The thing is that the Legion have a kill instinct. The drones are designed to, if they see a human, kill it. Now, back before the Empire fell, the Emperor, the Imperials could shut the Legion down with a command. So now that they're gone, there's no way to shut him down. Not looking at Frederica. The thing is,
Yeah.
once you get assimilated into the Legion, you still retain your memories and a certain amount of desires, which in Ray's case is protection and beg his forgiveness. But the kill instinct programming, in the stronger person like Ray, they mix together and they start confusing the person. And this confusion, they're driven to a certain point, it'll start to tear them apart, which is what starts to happen to Ray. You actually get in his headspace again at the start of Run Through the Battlefront Part 1, where he realizes this because he's following Shin and the gang. And when he sees them about to get assimilated, he manages to save them and drag them the rest of the way because being a Legion, he knows that the Federacy is here, and if he can get them there, they'll be safe. And from when you're looking at it from his perspective there, he's sane, he's Ray, and he's desperately trying to make sure he can protect them before his systems clash and before the kill order can reassert itself and drive him nuts. They later managed to capture one of the Legion's shepherds. She's known as, give me a second, well, her real name is Zelene, and oh, what's her name? Hang on. Legion. I had the page up beforehand. Let's see if I can pull it up. Anyway, she's the one who created them. So she's able to, she's caught, and she wants to be caught. So they get to interrogate her. And she explains, because Shin has by now come to the realization that some of the original person behind when their brains are, he comes to the realization, Mistress, that's it, that was her call sign in the Legion. He comes to the realization that that these are like souls being tortured by the devil and forced to continue to fight when they would rather pass on to whatever's next, heaven or hell for whoever the person is. And she explains that no, there's no way you could have saved Ray. There was no way to get him back. He is Legion now. If you were in this room with me, she explains, because they have her tied down. And earlier, Merciless Queen was the other title for her. She explains, okay, you're in the observation room up there. I'm down here in this bay where I've been held. If you were to come and join me in this place, my programming, no matter how much I like you personally, would override me. And like Ray and certain other shepherds, she can extend those silver micro machine nanite hands. And even though she is defenseless otherwise, these could still hurt and kill him. So she says, no, once we're Legion, there is nothing you can do except destroy us and let us go.
Yeah, and there's the wonderful scene that's interesting too. There's the wonderful scene at the end of season 2 where Frederica manages to influence her, who called her knight, like who was like her personal protector when she was a princess in the Confederacy when it was the Empire, and she manages to influence him and to distract him long enough for Shin and the other 86 there to attack by pointing a gun at her own head.
Yeah.
So it becomes a war in his mind because he, his number one goal in his previous life was protecting her and keeping her safe before he became Legion. And now his of course, the Legion programming is that you have to kill any human who attacks you. And, it might do this
Or
by...
any human who's standing there. Because Shin, when
or
he
any
first...
human who's there.
Yeah.
Right. And, it seems like that what the Legion do, and the way that they work is that even if you are... This is like me extrapolating from the scene a little bit. It'll mess with your own... I guess implications. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Inclinations. That's a word. Implications. That's wrong. Inclinations. It'll mess with your own inclinations and what you would normally want to do and warp them if it needs to in order to get you to kill someone. So, for example, Ray, when he sees Shin, says something like, "I need to get you out of that. All I need to do is get you out of that human shell," right? And then later, he's when Shin is fighting Frederica's Knight Legion. I think he's accusing Shin of like being a threat to the princess, somehow. And just in his head that somehow, some way, if he kills Shin, will save the princess. And it seems to be implied that this is like the Legion is just going to mess with your brain so that somehow you're going to want to kill these people, right? It's going to override you. And Frederica manages to kind of force him to sort of go at war with himself for a moment, because his immediate overriding desire from his life is to stop and save Frederica, and it's at war with his desire as Legion to kill whoever is in front of him. And this causes a pause long enough for them to turn the tide of the battle.
Now, it's interesting you bring up Kyria, and that's a good point, because Ray's motivations were noble. He wanted to ask forgiveness. He wanted to protect Shin. Kyria's only noble impulse is to protect Frederica. Once he sees her, prior to that, because he thinks she's dead, he wants to burn the entire world to the ground because, as he himself says, he has nothing. Yeah. So in a way, Ray is trapped in the upper levels of hell because he's actually a nice guy and he's actually had a very noble life, whereas Kyria is... it's debatable exactly where he stands in his morally, because and Frederica talks about this in the lead up. She even points out that before he was taken into the Legion, because he'd lost too many people, he'd lost his immediate family. His grandfather had gone over to join the Confederacy and leave the Empire behind, because Shin's grandfather is still alive. Spoilers. But so Kyria doesn't know about that. He didn't know any of his family was left. Most of his friends were in the same location as he was, guarding Frederica, and the closer the Confederacy came, the more and more of them died. So that eventually he was the only person his own age from his own group left. The only thing he had to fixate on after that was Frederica, and when it looked like even she was gone and dead, he completely lost it. But even before that, he was scaring her, because he would come back from the battlefield covered in blood with a mad smile on his face. There's a lot of parallels, particularly through... you can see some from before with the first book, but they get drawn out and emphasized more in through parts 1 and 2, because Shin is now dealing with the same type of problem. His entire reason to continue existing through book 1 was to kill Ray and put him to rest. Now that that's done, now that Ray is actually gone, he's left with the question of, why am I still alive? Because he got Ray's forgiveness, or Ray managed to get his forgiveness. Shin has not forgiven himself, because and this ties into why he's 16 and why he has to be a kid, he has not forgotten when Ray snapped and tried to kill him because Ray was overwhelmed by the pressures of the camp and the fact that he just his mother, they both lost their father a little while before that. So Shin being nagged him, and Ray was dealing with all sorts of bad things, so he snapped. But Shin and he said things that Shin still remembers, and Shin has internalized for so long that he doesn't realize quite what he's doing. So Shin and Kiria have these parallels of Kiria believes he has nothing left when Frederica is in fact alive, and if he burns down the world, he will essentially kill her. Shin has his friends. He has Lena. He hasn't realized that yet because at this point they know that the Republic has fallen and they think everyone there is dead because they can't connect with the radios. And Shin, it's not conveyed well in the anime, but Shin sometimes, when he's can hear a second voice very dimly over the power raid. And it's easy to miss in the anime because it's if she speaks in Japanese, then the subs, the people who subtitle it haven't been able to on the on the power raid, and it comes more clearly in the second battle with the Morpho, out in the field of Einsteinflag. I think I murdered that word. Um, so he's got these parallels with Kiria, who's essentially gone mad in his human form and been absorbed into the Legion when he was already nuts. So combine his desire to burn the world down with the Legion's kill order. The only thing that stops him is seeing Frederica hold the gun to her head and say, you want to save me?" So his that one split second of distraction of emotional overload to fire the kill shot.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful moment in the show. Really, really well done. Yeah, you're right. One thing you mentioned earlier is the Joan of Arc imagery with Sand Magnolia. It's a weird hodgepodge of different things. They use German words to describe the equipment, but they use like kind of French sloganeering and iconography for a lot of their background stuff, and it almost seems like I think it's supposed to be something along the lines of like the ideals of the French Revolution taken to their logical extreme.
Yeah.
You know, the liberty, equality, fraternity, just taken all the way as extreme as it could possibly be, and which is an interesting idea, I think. One of the interesting parts of 86 to me was, and I mentioned this earlier in passing, but I want to give it more attention now, is that San Magnolia is a republic, but it is a dystopic republic. Essentially, you're looking. I think like San Magnolia is supposed to be a picture of what like end stage decadence looks like.
Yeah.
This is the republic literally at the very, very, very end of its lifespan. Only nobody knows it but the 86. And the 86 aren't very interested in telling anyone because they don't really care if the republic burns down or not. They do mention that one of the reasons that they're fighting is partially because they have no choice, but also because like they're being forced into it by the republic. But also because, let's be honest, the Legion will kill us too. And we're the only ones fighting. So it's interesting in that it's even more unclear in the anime, but like in both the book and the anime, the Republic, as far as we know, is the only country that is left standing. In the light novel, they just kind of don't talk much about anywhere outside of it, and then it just ends with like, and then the Confederacy showed up. Again, because she didn't know if he was going to continue the series or not, right? So It just ends with the Confederacy arriving and saving everybody, kind of. But in the anime, especially, at least to me, up until they're rescued by the Confederacy in the second season, it is very unclear that there is even any other civilization alive outside of the Republic. And that seems to be, too, what the 86 believe, right? Like, the 86 seem to be under the impression that it is the apocalypse. The Republic is the last remnant of humanity. They are about to fall, and the only thing they can do is survive for as long as possible. Like, that there is literally no hope left. That seems to be, like, they're pretty convinced of this, and they're also just kind of okay with it, because, you know, why not, right? As I'm looking at the 86 wiki, it says that the capital of the Republic is called Liberty et Equalite, so liberty and equality. Makes sense. So, as far as the country of San Magnolia, I think it's very, very interesting that Asado Asada chose to make it a republic, because, like, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, which I've mentioned multiple times, my absolute favorite anime, still is. That has not changed. I think it's a masterpiece. It is probably the greatest fantasy story of the 21st century. I think that's a fair claim to make. To be honest, I think that is. I would say that again. I would say that it's the greatest fantasy of the 21st century. Fullmetal Alchemist and the / Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Absolute masterpiece. I adore it. But in Fullmetal Alchemist, although they also have like a faux Germany aesthetic going on with their world, their government, they have a dictator. I mean, he's not really, to be honest, he's not even really a dictator. He's an emperor, but it's notably a monarchy, right? And it is, interestingly enough, still a monarchy by the end of the series. Mustang mentions at one point in Fullmetal Alchemist, when they ask him about what his long-term plans are, Mustang explains that the goal is that when they take over, they'll turn it into a republic, and then they'll put everybody who was involved in the destruction of Ishval on trial for war crimes. Yeah. And he's including himself in this. But that's not how the series ends. It actually ends with Major Grummel. I think he was Major or General Grummel. General Grummel ends up in charge. You know, the old man with the mustache, who I believe is, I think he was related to Hawkeye, if I recall. Though I might be wrong about this. But whatever. I think he was. I haven't looked this up. Yeah, Max is mentioning Fjord King Bradley. So, anyway, the whole point I'm making here is that when Arakawa had to criticize a totalitarian society, for all of my love of Fullmetal Alchemist, she kind of took the easy route. She used a monarch. Now, us in the liberal West, and I mean liberal in the classical sense, not necessarily in the sense that, you know, anybody on the right wing would even necessarily disagree with, we tend to look down on monarchs just on principle, and we look at the Republic as the more noble way. But, of course, I think it's fascinating that Asado, and it is very clear, too, even more so in the novel than the anime, when she can kind of expound about this, that Asado did this very deliberately.
Very.
Right? Like, that San Magnolia is a republic, and she mentions multiple times that it is like a matter of moral belief for the people of the Republic that they have the superior system.
Yeah.
Like, that it is a moral, you know, it is a moral and practical and just generally the fact that they had a republic and they were fighting against an empire was one of the things that in the Republic's head specifically made them better.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That they were a republic was wed to their identity. You know, and Lena mentions, you know, she talks about like the slogans of the Republic. They had like 5 slogans, but they were essentially analogous. to liberty,
Yeah,
equality, fraternity. Yeah, I think
yeah, liberty,
nobility was,
equality, nobility, and brotherhood, I think, are the last two.
yeah, brotherhood, which is fraternity. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
synonym for fraternity. So,
yeah, there it is.
the-
Freedom, equality, brotherhood, justice, and nobility. That's what the five-color flag is supposed to stand for.
yeah, so there you go. Freedom and equality are, absolute mainstays of modern liberal society and arguably,
Mhm,
classical liberals. And they're one of those things that, like, that because we have equality and because we have liberalism and, freedom, that's what liberal is, right? We
mhm.
are morally superior to people who don't. And this was like a core belief of the Republic. So she kind of explores, well, then how? How do you have the 86 if these are your ideals? And Lena mentions in story that the Republic has abandoned these ideals long ago. Now, I
Yeah.
think it's interesting, though, that San Magnolia shares some Joan of Arc imagery, because Joan of Arc would not have been a liberal. Joan of Arc was very much a monarchist. In fact, she was an arch monarchist. That's arguably the thing about Joan of Arc that's most admirable about her, is that Joan of Arc is intensely loyal to the Dauphin, Charles VII. So I am a huge admirer of Joan of Arc. I have read a lot of primary sources, and I've read several books and things about Joan of Arc. I've studied her in some depth. So I would say that if you were to talk to Joan of Arc about liberty, equality, and fraternity, she would not be able to follow the conversation, and not because she's not intelligent. Joan of Arc was extremely intelligent. It's kind of frightening how intelligent that she was, considering her background. Uh, but because that was simply not an idea that was associated with, it was not something that was associated with government at the time.
Yeah.
This idea of liberty, equality, fraternity, those weren't really things that people talked about. If you had asked Joan what the basis of government was, she wouldn't have said the will of the, what's the phrase? Not the will of the people, consent of the governed, right? She wouldn't have said the consent of the governed. She would have said that Dauphin was the king who was meant to rule because by the will of God, and that's why he had the right to rule. And if you had mentioned anything about the consent of the governed, Joan probably would have responded that no, no, that's not true. It's not the consent of the governed. Uh, because it doesn't matter if you want to be governed by him. He's the rightful king. He's the king appointed by God. Saint Michael the Archangel told me himself that I was to help him take his throne and get coronated in Reims, and drive the English out of France. So I find it interesting that she's combining these influences in France. Like, she's combining the French Revolution, almost like the noble parts of the French Revolution, into somebody that into somebody that can has this iconography associated with her, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Somebody who has this iconography associated with her, like Joan of Arc.
Interesting.
Uh,
It's interesting. It's interesting that you point out you go to this because one of the things we find out toward the end of the book is that Saint Magnolia was killed by the very people she fought to free. That's again another. You can kind of see some Joan of Arc in the statues of Saint Magnolia that are all over the Republic.
yeah,
But the fact that it's revealed she was murdered after saving her country, and there are parallels between Lena and Saint Joan of Arc and Saint Magnolia as well. And the fact that she was murdered, and the fact too that it's been about 400 years since San Magnolia overthrew their monarchy. Um, there, it's not. It's ties in very much to the French Revolution. A lot of the architecture that you see in the anime for San Magnolia for Liberty at the city is reminiscent of France. It's harder to see in the towns and places where the 86 fight because they've been battered by artillery fire and all the rest of it. But the city itself, especially when it looks like a European city, especially when you see the parts where Lena's waiting to get on the bus to go to the Palace Blanc uh, Blanc-Neige. I know I murdered that. I'm sorry. Um, and there's the Palace Loon, which is um, was the royal palace and now is, I think, the headquarters for the Republican government. But she takes a lot of different things because they also mentioned the Weimar Republic. So this is another thing that Asado really is well writing. She doesn't just rely on one particular historical influence. I mean, we joke that the Nazis are the best bad guys and they'll last 1,000 years. But the thing is, over the last 70, we've kind of made them the biggest boogeyman ever. To the point
Yeah.
that when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, one of the things I liked about it, and one of the things I still like about it, is, oh yay, we finally got communists as the bad guys.
So
We're finally
I'm going to
moving on.
I'm going to point out here. You're right, and I sort of agree, and here's why. Uh, if you watch Red Letter Media, the Mr. Plinkett reviews, which by the way are brilliant reviews, he has a very warped sense of humor, so I would say it's not for everyone. I guess, but his reviews are so good on their own. They're such brilliant analyses that I really do recommend them. He does a review of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and he points out that was actually one of the problems with uh, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I agree with him, where he's saying that we're allowed to. And don't get me wrong, I agree with you. I wish that they would have just straight up made the communists the bad guys, but they don't exactly. So, what does Indy say famously in the first movie? Nazis. I hate those guys, and you laugh because everybody hates Nazis, and to say I hate those guys sounds like an understatement, which is part of the joke. In
Yeah.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, there is a line where Indy says Russians, and that's it. He doesn't say anything after that. And Mr. Plinkett, in his review, points out that probably the line was originally or supposed to be Russians. I hate those guys. Except that Hollywood is still too sympathetic to communism and to communist Russians that they couldn't actually have him do it. He also mentions that they have this weird subplot where at the beginning of the movie where Indy is being investigated by the American government for like alleged anti-American activities, and he says, I am pretty sure that they added this because unlike the Nazis, you aren't allowed to just hate the communists. There are too many communists that are it's still considered too respectable to just say, yeah, they're the villains for being communists. So they need to add the scene at the beginning to remind you that America did bad things too. Now, obviously, we who know history know that in comparison to what the Russians did, there was very much a good guy and a bad guy, or at least there was a bad guy, and there were people who were not imprisoning political dissidents in ice cold winter prison camps
Mhm.
in Siberia, and one side that was. So, the Russians absolutely in the Cold War, like as much as I have my issues with what our country does, and now in modern clown world America is another thing entirely. In our
Yeah.
dispute with the Russian Cold War, there is no question that we were the more moral choice of the two.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we did everything right, but comparing the communists to the Americans was honestly really no more radical than comparing Nazis to Americans. The communists were just as bad. People would argue
Yeah.
worse. I don't think it's worth arguing. Yeah, when you're
The
maybe worse than that, yeah, you're on the Nazi level here. But
yeah, I
Kingdom
mean,
of the couldn't do that. They
the
couldn't. They
the
couldn't
difference
win.
is the body count. Sorry.
Yes, yeah, but Kingdom of the Crystal Skull could not, right?
Right.
They they made the Russians the bad guys in the movie, but they made sure to add a scene at the beginning to remind you that America did bad things too, and they make sure not to connect it to communism.
Yeah.
Specifically,
That's
they
a good
go
point.
out of their way not to do that. So, when I first watched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, we're at the end of the discussion now, and I'm going to have to mention David's book in a moment because we hit 9:00. I'll mention Kingdom of the Crystal Skull briefly. When I first watched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I remember I tried very hard to like it, and then we reached the end of the movie, and the aliens showed up, and I said, no, I can't do it. That was terrible.
Yeah.
And like the alien thing was just so dumb and so terrible. I also remember I watched this when we were younger at a drive-in movie theater with my parents there, and there's a scene where Shia LaBeouf is like in the jungle and he's chasing after. There's a jeep driving through, and there are a bunch of monkeys around him, and he sees them start swinging on the vines, and Shia LaBeouf starts swinging with the monkeys, and he catches up to the jeep. And I just remember my parents at this scene looking at each other while sitting at the drive-in theater, and they looked at each other, and then they just started laughing hysterically. Like, it was so dumb. And it wasn't a worthless movie. I do agree with you on that. Like, it was not a worthless film. It had good things about it. I don't think that the character of, Indy's son is an inherently bad one, for example. I think that the idea makes sense. I thought that Shia LaBeouf actually did kind of fine in the he was all right. At least I guess he was, and honestly, his scenes with Indy were some of the better scenes in the movie. But yeah, that's all. That's pretty much all I'm willing to give it. I did not like
the only
that. I tried to like it.
yeah, the only
I didn't.
the only thing I'll say to finish up is that it's very refreshing to find Osato pulling from all these different things to make her bad guys. She doesn't stick with just one, which tends to be a tendency that a lot of writers today have, is because after a point we've been so in immersed and absorbed by osmosis these particular stereotypes, we automatically jump to them. And she's like, nope, I'm just gonna grab whatever's
Yeah,
evil enough
exactly.
to that.
I was on a bit of a rant when I was talking about Joan of Arc. I'm very passionate about Joan of Arc as a topic, so I went a bit off topic, but you're right. That's kind of what I was trying to get at. That Osato is, I really, really like that it's a republic because it makes us question our assumptions. And it reminds me a little bit of Legend of the Galactic Heroes as well, where
Mhm.
one of the most moral characters in the entire story is Reinhard von Lohengrin, the absolute dictator of the Empire. And he is arguably the single most moral character in the story, certainly one of them. And the Federation, one of the reasons that the Empire is able to do so well in the battles with the Federation and in their war with the Federation is that the United Federation of Planets is incredibly corrupt. Like, incredibly corrupt. And he is not corrupt. He inspires loyalty. His people love him. They end up conquering, like, an area, but they do it in a peaceful way. There is an absolutely wonderful scene, one of my favorite scenes in any show, in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, where he mentions there's the United Federation of Planets on one half, and there's like the Galactic Empire on the other. And there are only two ways to get to the other side. You could either pass through Iserlohn Fortress, and Iserlohn Fortress, it's implied that like whoever controls that fortress controls passage into the other half of the galaxy. It's a very, very important like blockade point. And currently the Federation controls it. So they say, well, they'll have to take Iserlohn Fortress if that's all but impossible, so they're safe. Or you could go through the independent merchant like area of the galaxy, and they're considered independent, so they're neutral, they're off base. So they're going to go and attack them. And I'm being told without being told by Ben, shut up. But I'm gonna finish what I'm saying. Sorry, Ben. Anyway, so they're being told. So he's being told he can't go through there, but he does. He invades the merchant area, which is considered a shock to the Federation. Like he's broken the neutrality. Yeah, sorry, Ben. I'm finishing my sentence. No, 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 Ben, Ben. No, actually, you're completely right. Uh, okay, last thing. David's story. It's called. Wait, I have it on a link. I saved it. Seraphim, War Angel, Book 3. So the author David Halquist, who is a regular Pinkerton's Ghost author, has a new book out on Amazon. We have it linked at the top of the live chat. It is called Seraphim, War Angel, Book 3. And David is a wonderful author, and this series is very well reviewed and quite popular. We will talk to him about it in a few weeks at least, because there is a lot to talk about. If you like mecha action like you see in 86, Seraphim and the War Angel series generally is the series for you. Any last words, Caroline?
Well, I'm going to give Murd a shout out for rewatching Zoid's Chaotic Century. I really enjoyed the stream. It was great to hang out and talk about 86. And I hope we can do it again when the season 2 is finished, because this is definitely a series worth looking into more. I will also plug my mecha story, Lupus One. You can find it in Cersova Magazine's 2021 summer issue. And it has illustrations, people. So if you like, and I'll close out as I did last time. See you on the battlefield.
Yeehaw. See you all next week, everyone. We're good.